and then very naively again, thought we would close in August. Which again, to anyone listening to the podcast, don't make that mistake.
Even less chance.
And you hear it, people are like, you're never going to be able to close in August. Like, no, just because no one has been able to doesn't mean I could do it.
Welcome to season 3 of the Founder Funded podcast, a podcast for searchers by search experts, where we explore the route to business ownership without having that $1 million idea. I'm your host, Carl Lundberg, CEO at Joel Letterman and founder of the ETA Awards. Let's get into it.
Look, these shares are yours, unless you blow it up, unless we don't perform.
For some reason, M&A lawyers in particular love to finish things at 2 a.m. So a deadline's always helpful.
I think if you talk to Michael, he would probably tell you, first and last time I sell business, I'm probably on the side of like, that was fun, let's buy something else.
On this episode, we have Wharton and Harvard alum, ex-Google, tech founder turned searcher, and now CEO of HMDG, Ben Marcilhacy. Ben, great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Carl.
No, I'm really looking forward to this chat. So let's start, I guess, with the basics. Quite a CV, quite a background, quite an introduction there. Be great to hear from you. A little of your kind of backstory.
Absolutely. So I'm French, as you can probably hear, even though I got the British citizenship a month ago.
Oh, congratulations.
The accent's not going anywhere. I thought they'd give me the passport and the accents would change. So born and raised in France, started my career at Google after university in 2011, which was an interesting place to work because at the time it wasn't yet that blue chip employer. And I think that's probably why I got in. But, and it was, pretty amazing to work at Google and initially in Paris, because it was still satellite office that was pretty small. So it felt very entrepreneurial, yet with, the toolbox and the firepower that Google would give you to achieve your goal. So that was very much like an amazing start to my career. The company grew and obviously, brought more people on board, started to get a different kind of people as well. Everything became a bit more structured and like political. I moved to London after 3 years. So I spent 2 years in London across, a variety of roles. And my goal was always to do an MBA in the US for several reasons. I had spent some time in the US before. Obviously, working in an American company kind of shows you, like the American mindset and so on. It's something I really wanted to have for myself. Interestingly, actually, with my very first manager at Google, and I think the 3 months review, he made me do a 5-year plan, and I was like, in 5 years, I'm going to go do an MBA in the US. So I didn't even remember that, but when I told him I was going to do it, I was like, that's one of the first things you told me.
I know, yeah.
And so did my MBA. At the time, really spent or focused most of my time while I was there exploring opportunities more on the venture capital side and the tech entrepreneurship side of things. Spent a bit of time in a venture firm over the summer there. Did a bit of work for that firm, and during the second year. And after HBS, I moved back to London to join a very early stage entrepreneurial project, essentially a software platform in the hospitality space. Spent about 2 years there, which was a pretty crazy time to be there. It's really where I experienced, the hyper growth. It was also like kind of the bonanza time for VC-backed startup around that time.
What year was this?
So it was 2018 to 2020.
Got it. Yeah.
So, great outcome on that company. But I left in 2020 after 2 years to start my own project or my own company, which was, again, a software company in accounting. And I did that for about 4 years. Not a great outcome, returned some, but less than what was invested. So, you win some, you lose some.
Absolutely.
But while that project was winding down, I was trying to think about what I wanted to do next, obviously. And I think there were a few opportunities that I could think about that I'd be interested in tech, but I was also very interested to spend a bit more time thinking about doing something that wasn't, bits and lines of code, and to do something a bit more tangible.
Yeah.
And interestingly, at the time, my girlfriend was opening her first acupuncture clinic here in London. So I spent a bit of time with her, helping her and so on. I mean, all the credit is on hers. I'm not trying to get any credit on that, but it essentially gave me a pretty nice and good exposure to the healthcare market or the healthcare space in the UK.
Yeah.
And I would say specifically the private healthcare market. Interestingly as well, I have a lot of doctors in my family. My sister's a dentist,
Okay.
so I'm the failure of the family, but that's okay. And so I looked into different opportunities there, and initially my plan was to do a buy and build in the physiotherapy space. So essentially to acquire clinics and build a group of clinics across the UK. Had a very precise thesis as to like the kind of clinic I would want to acquire, where they would be based, and so on and so forth. I spent about, I'd say 6 or 7 months working pretty hard on it. So essentially canvassing the whole of the UK, driving around, meeting clinics, clinic owners, visiting clinics, and so on and so forth. I remember sending about 300 letters to clinic owners and so on and so forth. So really did the whole bottom up like a playbook, and ultimately decided not to move forward with that opportunity. And we can double click on that if you want, but for several reasons, it didn't feel like I was the right person to achieve that vision or that objective. And I had at the time 3 clinic owners who had signed an LOI with me. So, I was essentially about to go for it and start to look for financing for this first set of acquisition and so on and so forth. And I told them that actually I wouldn't be moving forward with the acquisition. And I had built a very good relationship with 2 of them, I'd say. And 2 of them told me actually, well, you should talk to this guy, Michael, who's doing or marketing or digital marketing or website and so on and so forth, because he's always interested in hearing about tech. You're someone who's pretty interested in the space. Have a chat, see what happens. And I'm sure, worst case scenario, it's going to be an interesting half an hour on Zoom.
Yep.
And fast forward 9 months after that, we closed the acquisition of Michael's business that he founded with his co-founder, Hannah, HMDG.
Wow, there's a lot there. Incredible story. I guess, actually what surprised me is how serendipitous that perhaps was, that you decided. Actually, I had assumed that kind of the order of that was slightly reversed, in that you found this company and then kind of dropped the physio roll-up thing, but actually you decided not to do that and then immediately met the seller of the business that you then acquired, which is incredible. What was it about the roll-up that you decided not to do?
So I think there's several elements, right? The first one being I was very specific as to what I would want to acquire. And I think my thesis was all around essentially the privatization of healthcare in the UK.
Yeah.
And I was really interested in clinics that had a very strong footprint in the physiotherapy space, but could evolve into a bit more like multidisciplinary clinics. And so I was really looking for clinics of a certain size in geographies with a certain demographic, which essentially were wealthy commuter towns. So spend a fair amount in Kent, for instance, and areas like that. And so the pond I was fishing in was already pretty small, and I think a lot of the targets were in the 200, maybe 250 of clean EBITDA after adjustments. So, that means that even with a small topco, you probably need at least 5 acquisitions to be past the million in EBITDA, which my understanding was that that's pretty much the threshold for the doors of the leverage to open. So essentially that would have meant, a lot of equity. And I think more than that, actually, that's like the very financial, like number-driven view of it. But I think there were more personal elements as well. I think I personally, not coming from an M&A background, didn't feel like I would be the best person to actually close 5, 6, 7 deals in a short period of time, while also building a group. And at least, you might not have to build this layer of integration from the get-go, but it'd be a bit tricky to just buy 5 or 6 clinics and just let them do their own thing without any integration, right? And that's, personally where I was like, I don't think I'm going to be able to pull that one off. And I think there was a second thing as well that I realized, was that not being a clinician myself, something that I suffered from, or that I found a bit painful. I found a bit painful when I was working in technology was that there are a lot of decisions that are very material to the business that you're not really equipped to make. So, sometimes two of my extremely skilled engineers would argue about something and be the tiebreaker, and it's pretty much a coin toss, and I'm going to decide one way or another.
Yeah.
And I felt like on a lot of decisions, like should we buy a shockwave machine or this and that, like well, it would take me a long time to ramp up. And I think as well for sellers who would stay on board or senior staff, like I felt like working now for someone who doesn't know anything for a year or a year and a half would be a bit tricky. And so I kind of fell a bit out of love with the idea. And ultimately, I think some people are doing it, and I think they have a very different setup and so on and so forth, and they're doing phenomenally well at it. But it just felt like I wasn't the right fit for that particular venture.
It's a very brave decision to make, and actually, it sounds like all the right reasons. I often have that concern when it comes to tech businesses, because I personally would be so reliant on other people, right? I couldn't fix it myself. So I completely understand it. And as you say, some people are doing it, and actually, I've spoken to people on this podcast who are doing a roll up in that space, who I know that and actually what they've said is the integration piece is really hard. It's really hard, and the multiple arbitrage that people can quite easily assume happens. You buy stuff and then you sell it all and you get a bigger multiple. Actually, it takes a lot of effort and a lot of work, and as we know, the partnered search would make that easier. And also particularly having like operating expertise and M&A expertise would also make it easier, right? So I do think that quite often it comes up, the conversation about what's more important for a solo searcher who's going to go and buy one company, M&A experience or operating experience. And normally people conclude it's the latter, because you can buy in the M&A experience for one deal. But if you're doing a roll-up and the main thing is doing deals over the next 5-10 years, that question becomes much harder.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, and so then you serendipitously met Michael. How did that initial chat lead to you buying this company?
So I think we had like 30 minutes booked in our calendars for on a Thursday afternoon. It's that call we keep for the Friday afternoon. Sorry, I'll take it in a few weeks and see what happens. And I think we spent about 2.5 hours talking about a variety of things, including how CRMs for clinic owners were broken, and there's a lot of tech that could come into clinics and clinical practices to streamline a variety of things and processes. And so we were pretty much like whiteboarding a bunch of ideas. And I think towards the end of the call, he told me a bit about HMDG, so the business and so on and so forth. He told me that he was absolutely knackered after having worked days and nights for 6 years nonstop and so on and so forth, and that there's a whole avenue of growth for the business and a lot of strategic things that could be done that he didn't feel like he had the energy to do. And I think kudos to him for also realizing that one of his limitation, or like one of the reasons why he was ultimately like considering a sell, was that he felt like he wasn't the right person to take the business from, I think at that time, about 15 employees to 30. And I think he was very clear on what he wanted to do, what he's good at. And I think part of the deal we made was, look, you're going to focus on what you like and be extremely good at it like you are, and I'm going to take over the rest. And also you'll work a few less hours and go back to the gym and be healthier. And so that's going to be a win-win. And so that's where essentially the conversation like slowly moved towards. And then I remember specifically I was traveling for Christmas that year so it was 2024, and I kind of threw a bit of a Hail Mary, and I told him, look, I'll casually, look at a sell, no promise, but send me your financials. And he sent me his financial, I think, or the financials of the business, I think on December 24th or 25th. I remember it was like on Christmas Eve. And I started looking at it and felt, it's a very interesting business from, the financial point of view. And then I think from there, the spent a bit of time, obviously reviewing the numbers and so on and so forth. And then I think after that, yeah, our conversations were a bit more
You were a bit more
narrowed and
focused
focused on,
yeah.
okay, what does that look like?
Yeah.
How do we structure it for you to stay on board? And I think ultimately, like, what's more numbers that make it work for everyone involved.
Perfect, great. Well, so I think we'll be more on the company a bit later. Just to go back to the point where you decided to, I guess, initially do a roll up and then ultimately to acquire a single company. What was, I suppose you'd been through the kind of the startup phase in one company and then another. What was that kind of the turning point that made you decide to kind of commit, several years to a acquisition strategy in the UK?
Yeah, and so I think, in classic entrepreneurial fashion, I had, that was probably 80% of my time. I had 20% of my time on other things and so on. But I was very committed to it, and I think I really wanted to explore like opportunities that were a bit different and that weren't just purely technology and venture-backed software and so on and so forth. And so I think that was a pretty strong driving force behind that. And so obviously these are the kind of businesses that are very well suited for an acquisition rather than a startup.
Yeah.
And I was lucky to have people in my friend circles who had acquired business before, whether the structured way, like some people that I got to meet at school and so on and so forth, but also some friends that or people I've worked with back in France when I was there in 2012 or something, who essentially had a friend or friend of a friend looking to sell an e-commerce website and they bought it from him, and stories like that where there wasn't like the whole myth around, wow, I'm buying a business and I have no idea what I'm doing, because if there's a good deal, the money's going to be found, and if it's a good deal and both parties are interested, an agreement is going to be found. So I think there were some areas that I was much more unaware of and maybe a bit more stressed about, but I think like buying a business in itself wasn't something that was particularly intimidating.
Really, that's amazing. It's actually a very valuable perspective to have, right? That actually, I can do this, because I think it's a lot of people don't realize, and then they have this like sort of period where they're like, I can go buy a business.
I'm not saying like I was going into it thinking it was going to be easy and so on, and it wasn't. But it's like, if it's going to be a dogfight, then you're prepared for it, right?
Yes,
and I was
exactly,
I know it can be done. I know it's going to be a ton of work. And I know there's luck involved. But
but it
for
happens.
other things.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's kind of how I
So
it. And I think it's an emotionally draining project. I think if you talk to Michael, he would probably tell you, first and last time I sell business, I'm probably on the side of like, that was fun, let's buy something else. It's different perceptions of the same experience.
And what was the impact of your time at Harvard on that? Was it, clearly you mentioned kind of some of the people you met there. Had you heard about entrepreneurial acquisitions during your time there? Did you take a search fund class or?
So I was there 2016, 2018, and I'd said a whole search fund ETS space, or like, it was probably one of the sexiest class or year that I didn't take like an idiot. It's one of the classes I really regret not taking, because again, I was very much like on the VC tech startup path. But I caught up, I read all the cases a couple of years after, read the book and so on and so forth. But yes, and I think, so I obviously was lucky to be in the same class as people who had started doing it even when we were at school, including some very close friends of mine. So again, like, I saw that it was possible. I saw that obviously, it was a lot of effort and so on and so forth, but that it was doable. And I think where these guys came through, or were very helpful during my process. It was also, very much on the human side of things. And, it's like, I was obviously, pulling my hair on that one very particular top number in the spreadsheet or in the valuation. And they were like, look, this business is going to be your life. You're going to spend 5 to 10 years operating it. Like
Yeah.
it's a rounding error. Stop
That number's not.
sweating the details and so
Yeah.
on and so forth. And yeah, so I think that's the personal like coaching side of it was extremely helpful.
Yeah.
And then I would say as well, like for fundraising, I think there was a network that was very, very receptive to the opportunity from, obviously through the Harvard connection. I'd say.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard that before, that, actually a lot of the value in the Harvard MBA is the network that you get from it.
Yeah, I think, it's like, and I think the more you grow and so on and so forth, you progress in your career, it's people, when you are younger or fresh grad, people will jump on a call with you. And so, if someone now is looking at an ETA a journey in the UK and so on and so forth, yes, I'm going to take the call because ultimately, you get a give back, and also it's quite fun, and hopefully, you can even like have a tiny impact on their journey. It's something that I think is very positive.
Yeah, no, that's one of my favorite things about the community is that it's so collaborative, right? And people give time to each other and educate each other and help each other, which I think is fantastic. You don't see it enough particularly in the world of business, right?
Absolutely.
So
I think it's there's actually, I think it'd be the chances of two searchers who might be at different stages in their journeys with different skill sets and so on and so forth, like actually competing for a deal and so on. I think it's the chances are pretty abysmal.
Yeah,
but,
they're really low. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd normally ask about the search process, but there wasn't really a search process for this deal. So it probably worthwhile going back to the process where you received the financials on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. Suddenly, actually, you were like, I quite want to do this, and then there's this 9-month period of, I suppose, LOI, DD, and so on, but ultimately resulting in closure. Like, perhaps you could talk me through that process. Like, what was it that made you think, hang on, this is a company I want to buy, and then how did that process play out?
Yes, absolutely. So, Arez, I haven't said much about HMDG, so I'll just tell you quickly what the business does. So HMDG is a digital marketing agency focused in healthcare. And I think the business actually started in what we call the MSK niche, so the musculoskeletal niche, which is essentially chiropractors, physiotherapists, and osteopaths. And very interestingly, the business started building websites for clinic owners, and then from there essentially expanded to taking and offering more digital marketing services and so on and so forth. So the first thing about that business is that it played very well into what I had done at Google. And going back to what I was saying about the frustration sometimes to not necessarily understand what it should take, or what the right decision would be for the business. This is one where, yes, I think, like anything related to Google Ads, to some extent SEO and so on and so forth, was a language that, I spoke very well, that I understand, and so on and so forth. So there was immediately that sense of, understanding what the business was about, the value that it was delivering, why also it would make a lot of sense, or it made a ton of sense for the business to be so focused in a niche and to expand gradually rather than just be a broad, like even the healthcare provider or healthcare digital marketing agency. But even beyond that, we have the capacity and we could work with accountancy firms and so on and so forth. And because I know the product and so on and so forth, it's very obvious that we had an avenue in front of us in the healthcare space, and again in some niches of the healthcare space. And I think Michael and I are also very similar in the sense that we have big ideas. We love to think about all the stuff we could do and so on and so forth. And there was very clear on understanding that HMDG in itself is a tremendous platform that I think can grow through expanding the services that it offers, expanding to other niches, exploring into other territories. But I think there is a much broader vision around essentially using the playbook that we have, the ethos that we have, and the way we care for our clients to expand potentially to other services beyond digital marketing and so on and so forth. So essentially, the common ground that we found very quickly was that essentially, yeah, there was a huge boulevard in front of us to build something much bigger, and that I think the way we could do it is also to do it in a fun way and in an interesting way. I think there was a lot of time that we spent with Michael and Hannah assessing each other, understanding the our ways to do things, the culture that we wanted to either maintain in the building or in the business, or bring to the business.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so, in terms of actually structuring the deal, I suppose it's worth understanding if you're happy to share, the level of EBITDA was at that time, and then how much leverage you were able to put in, whether there was some deferred, some rolled capital and so on as well. And whether that was the deal that you initially shook hands on, or if that kind of evolved as you went through the process.
Yeah, so the business was pretty much at $1 million in EBITDA, or at least, actually, very interestingly, the business had been growing pretty phenomenally well. Like, we're looking at 30-35% a year, which is still the trajectory we're on. And so one of the leap of faith that I took was, I think at this point, we're pretty much in February 2024, I'd say. And so that's when we start to, refine the numbers and discuss essentially what the deal would look like with Michael and Hannah. And because they had been so transparent already, I mean, I already had access to, their accounting software and pretty much everything. So I was seeing the business from the inside. I was comfortable essentially underwriting a pretty steep growth rate till the end of their fiscal year, which was end of October. So pretty much we valued the business on the forward
8 months.
Essentially 8 months, which ultimately the business over delivered. So I think it was a risk that I'm glad I took. But so essentially that told, or that essentially set on a pro forma basis, this is where we think the business is going to be, and we agreed to that. So let's value the business not on what it is in February, but what it will be in October, which was pretty much $1 million in EBITDA, just to simplify it. And so the first thing that we had to agree with Michael, and I would say what was interesting is that Michael and Hannah are both extremely smart, but essentially didn't have experience, selling a business, obviously, and so on and so forth. And so we're very intimidated to some extent by the process. And I think we had to do some work to essentially make it very clear, very transparent, and essentially have a very clear understanding that for a business this size, the amount of money would pretty much be this, or the EV pretty much would be, applying a certain multiple to that size, and that would give you kind of the value of your business. Then, it was essentially, I don't want to sound, patronizing, but educating them or saying, look, the more we can delay and defer, the bigger the amount, right? And I think that's something they really understood, and so on and so forth. We had a few back and forth on essentially whether they would retain some ownership or have an earn-out over multiple years while they were still involved in the business that essentially replicated an ownership structure, but would allow us for a simpler structure because they wouldn't be shareholder, but they would
without
mimic,
having to execute an option later.
That's what we went for. And so we had dinner, I think, in February, and I was like, look, I'm confident in the forward results and performance of the business. Here's the multiple that we apply, and structure-wise, I say we do this much upfront and then X, Y, and Z over time. And we shook hands on that. We never, in the 8 or 9 months that it took us to close the deal, we never revisited that number. We revisited the structure because we had to for their tax setup, for my tax setup, and so on and so forth. Yes. But ultimately, it was always something that we were, all very happy with. I think, looking back at the summer of 2024, we pulled our hair a bit on how to make things work for everyone on that front. But essentially, I told him, look, we're gonna if it's gonna happen, we're gonna work together. We're gonna be, calling each other every other day for years.
Yes.
So having, a negotiation that drags on for months where we, the two of us are playing the poker game where we don't show our cards, that's going to poison the well.
Yeah.
And I'm not very interested in that. So here's a number. I'm not going to back down unless obviously, there are skeletons in the closet. But again, you gave me the confidence that there wouldn't be any. And on my end, my commitment to you is that I'll get the bank or a bank to come and help with the financing, and I'll get some investors to also agree with that number. And and I'm confident I can do it. And so on that basis, we shook hands, pressed the button on starting to execute the deal, I think in March. Very naively thought we would close in June. So then June became the summer, and then very naively again thought we would close in August, which again, to anyone listening to the podcast, don't make that mistake.
Even less chance.
People are like, you're never going to be able to close in August. Like, no, just because no one has been able to doesn't mean I
could do that.
So we closed on September 4th, 2024, which, I would have loved for it to come in.
4th, not too bad actually.
Straight after summer.
People just come back from their summer holidays.
Exactly. I think, both our solicitors were not too happy. They would have loved for it to come to happen a bit later in September. But essentially, I think in June, the way we did it with Michael and Hannah, we decided that they would set up a meeting with the team on September 5th.
Okay.
And that's the meeting where we would announce it to them. Wow. I would come to Birmingham, meet everyone, and tell them about it. And so I think, that was great to have that as a forcing mechanism, because I think on the 2nd of September or something like that, we had, a few things where we had to rework something in the ESP and so on and so forth. And Michael, Hannah, and I were very adamant on the fact that it has to happen on the 4th, because on the 5th, we're telling the team. So, it's kind of like when you have a homework to give on a certain day. Yeah. Things are gonna happen, and you're gonna give it on that day.
To be honest, for some reason, M&A lawyers in particular love to finish things at 2 a.m. It's so a deadline's always helpful. So, and in terms of like trading post acquisition, how's it going? Are the plans that you kind of set and discussed, all these big visionary ideas that you and Michael kind of have been discussing, is that playing out?
Yeah. So I think that we're very clear on what we wanted to achieve in the first year was not rock the boat. So I think don't make any major changes. Yeah. And I would say, it's something where I'd give us an okay grade, still made a few changes a bit too quickly, but you live, you learn. And then essentially our goal and the view we had was to grow the business significantly, which we did, which is great. But the trade-off was, yes, we're probably going to do it in a way that's going to be a bit messy, a bit painful, and so on and so forth. But because of the nature of our business, which is fully like recurring revenue and very sticky revenue that obviously we generate in the first year is, 95% plus going to follow us in the second year, right? So it's kind of a no-brainer to go for it. And so I think the story for the second year now is to structure things a bit more. Obviously, keep chasing pretty aggressive growth, but to do it in a way that's a bit more adult. Yeah. So I would say, it's been 6 months that we entered our teenage years where we're not yet, we're a bit in between. Yeah. But it's going very well, and the business is trading, as well as we hoped, if not even better. So it's been very positive.
Perfect. A kind of a metaphor that our chairman at Joel Lederman often used to tell me is, when you've got a business and you're an early stage business, or even a business that perhaps has been in existence for a long time, but is in the early stages of a change process. You have the infancy, which is fairly challenging, it's okay. And then you get to the adolescence, and you can't avoid it, but all you can try and do is get through it as quickly as possible. So become a grown-up business and behave like No,
exactly. And I think for us that meant structuring the management a bit more, changing some systems, and obviously made my job so much easier that Michael and Hannah are still with the business. And
Yeah.
actually, Hannah now has much bigger relationship that we initially envisaged, because essentially after the first year, we decided with Hannah to make her the MD of HMDG. So she's now essentially running the day-to-day operations and so on and so forth. I'm still very involved on some strategic projects and a variety of other projects, but essentially she's running the show, which is great.
And does that mean is her intention now to stay in that position after the earnout as well? Or so there's not, this isn't a temporary thing.
No.
Oh, perfect. That's great.
That's a view, and I think ultimately we'll see where we are by then, with additional acquisitions and so on and so forth. But I think ultimately we work very well together, and so I think there's no reason for it to stop. I think just because the earnout stops.
Yeah, great. You mentioned other acquisitions. Is that one of your kind of growth levers that you're gonna?
It's definitely one. I'd say it's not one that we're actively pursuing in the sense that, I have an army of 6 interns sending letters to businesses, but there are a lot of things we can do. I think our position in the market also leads us to see a lot of opportunities. I'd said that we're technically a marketing agency, but we work with clinic owners who we advise on a variety of things. Like, I spend quite a fair amount of time actually helping some of our clients with their M&A, their exits, preparing for it, and so on and so forth. And which is something, we don't bill for, but, it's a way to give back to the industry, but also, something that I enjoy doing. But that essentially makes us pivotal points in the industry where when someone is seeing something, looking at, an opportunity, they ask us for advice. So I think, that allows us to jump on something. We're actually looking at an opportunity now that, could lead to something. But I would say probably next year, we're going to be much more aggressive on that front.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to have investors who, really believe in the vision, the thesis that we have. So I think, if you were to ask them, they'd probably want us to close one acquisition a quarter this year.
Yeah.
But, they know, they also know that we are obviously much closer to the business, and that I think the sequencing is essential.
Yes.
But I think, it's definitely something that we think a lot about.
Okay. And what's your kind of exit horizon? Have you thought about that? I imagine on the way in, you had to tell investors when they might get the money back.
So I think it's very clear to investors that there's the 5-year exit plan or 7 years exit plan. And I think it's pretty clear that the market we're in, so the digital marketing agency space, is very acquisitive. So I think, if we build something good and want to sell, we should be able to sell at an interesting valuation.
Yeah.
There's also some financial players who could be interested, specifically if we start to acquire businesses in other service providers in the healthcare space. And then something that I was very clear with them about is one of the exit that we will be looking at in 5-7 years is a recap, in the sense that some people want to exit. Some people actually, would rather stay on board and put another coin in the jukebox and go for another dance.
Yeah.
And I think, it's something that we'll consider as well.
Yeah.
And so I think, we're also lucky to be in a space, and I think everything that we're going to acquire, if we acquire anything, will have to be cash generative, like HMDG and so on and so forth. So ultimately, we want to be in a position where, there is, or there should be, distributions and so on and so forth before an exit. But I think the deal is that we'll look at one of the 3 paths after 5 or 7 years.
And I think if you're in a position where you have that optionality to exit yourself or roll and go again, it's a great place to be, because if you're loving it and you want to keep going, it's hard, right? But you might think, actually, there's more I can do here. But also you might think, let me have a break, so if you get to that position.
Exactly. And I think, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And I think, and it's something I tell clinic owners all the time. I sometimes get clinic owners who come to see me and they tell me, well, can you help me sell my business, or how should I approach it? And sadly, I have to tell them, well, look, you're a one-man band making 10K of profit. So you might be acquired, like essentially you might get a job with a sign-on bonus, but you don't really have a business to sell. And so I think, the advice that we give them is, can you build systems? Can you build essentially an engine that runs that you supercharge, but essentially where your presence is not, like the cornerstone of the whole thing.
Yes.
The whole thing. Sorry. And very interestingly, that's exactly how we think about HMDG and what we want to build. It's not that we're lazy and we don't want to do any work, and maybe that plays into it, but it's, if we build something that runs, we can focus on either the fun stuff or focus on the strategic stuff, which is acquiring another business, or I think we do pretty well with offering with clinic owners in Australia or in Canada and so on and so forth. But that will require time and dedication and focus that, I don't necessarily have if I spend a lot of my time doing customer support and checking into accounts to see if the Google ads are performing.
Absolutely. Makes complete sense. Okay, so I guess, it's starting off thinking about doing a roll up on your own to acquiring a company. Actually, you're now not on your own because you've got the vendors, thankfully, in the business with you. But it's particularly at the beginning there, a daunting, a lonely experience where possibly you're thinking at times, what am I doing? Why don't I just go and get a job? What's been like, have you had moments like that? And what's been the most challenging part of this journey for you so far?
Yeah, it's so the most challenging bit, I think, I'll give you two answers. One is like the most challenging time or moment before the acquisition, and then the challenging time I had when I was actually ramped up or took over. So before the acquisition, and some aspects of the fundraising were a bit daunting, and I was lucky that I raised money. I did about 4 rounds in the 2 businesses I was involved before. So I kind of had a sense of I had made a lot of mistakes, is what I'm saying. So I came to the table with some experience, and I was kind of, to some extent, not starting from scratch, but I was also raising or looking to raise on a different type of, business project, however you want to call it, with also a different set of investors and so on and so forth. And, I've seen, across the 5 times now that I've raised money, it's pretty much always the same pattern I've found personally. It's first, you get the friends and families and the low-hanging fruits and so on and so forth. So if you essentially see it as a graph, you start to spike and you tell yourself you're going to close that in a week because you're the best and it's so easy and so on and so forth. Turn out, like you're not going to get the whole allocation. Generally it's probably 10-20% if you're lucky. So then you start to expand the pool of people you're talking to, right? And here you're going to talk to people that you don't know. You actually don't even know if they're relevant for your deal or not, and your pitch is not great, and so on and so forth. So you start to enter the shadow, the valley of doubt and the valley of shadows, where no one's going to fund your deal, and you're an idiot, and actually your deal sucks, and this company's awful, and what am I doing here? But you power on to the point where like it starts to click, and you have the mojo and the momentum and so on and so forth. You start to have people you don't know actually telling you, I'm in, and so on and so forth. And so you start to see the snowball effect, and then these people are going to bring people on board, and then that's when you essentially really fill up your round, and in some cases you oversubscribe, which gives you then even more optionality to slice and dice and organize the cap table the way you want. I would say that the valley of doubt for me was particularly difficult, I'd say, in that fundraise, because I spent a lot of time, like I'd say probably 3-4 weeks, talking to the wrong people. And I think, going to or talking to traditional search fund investors with a deal that obviously wasn't a traditional search deal. So that meant with very different economics and so on and so forth. And so a lot of rigidity. I think my pitch also wasn't, the best. But yeah, that was a moment where I remember thinking to myself, well, maybe I thought it was going to be a bit too easy. And then after that, I realized that there's a whole subset of investors that, it's pretty different, I'd say, in terms of, the ones who are looking to back self-funded searchers. And then, I think once I made that realization and so on and so forth, it became much easier.
Yeah, there's plenty of capital out there, aren't there? And I've seen it happen where people have gone to traditional search fund investors and actually ended up being squeezed into traditional terms when they've run a self-funded search. And you're like, well, hang on, I haven't had the benefit of a salary during the last 2 years.
I had that exact conversation, and I was like, well, conceptually, if I follow your reasoning, then you give me 500K now, right? Or 400K.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, that's not exactly how it works. And I was like, well, specifically because I think, one of the things that was very important for me as well was I had terms in terms of, independence, governance, ownership, and so on and so forth that I was pretty set on. I mean, obviously, you can be too stubborn, but there are some things that were very important to me. So, that probably added a bit of a hurdle as well. But again, I think I remember when I started to really connect with investors in the self-funded space and so on and so forth, a lot of them in the US actually, we ended up being, massively oversubscribed. And I was lucky to be in a position where I could choose or select some investors who I think brought a very different type of, skill set or experience to the table. And so I think, we made space as well for some pretty small checks, all things considered, but people who, I developed a good relationship with during the fundraising process, and were very excited about the deal. And I was like, maybe on a day where I feel a bit down, they're going to be very excited about the business, and that's going to recharge my battery.
Yeah. And has it played out that way?
Yeah. There's a couple who I think that we built obviously a great relationship, and they are more often than not either ET entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs, so they know,
Got it. They've been there.
The hardship. Okay. And then I would say the tough thing when we took over the business was in January last year, so pretty much a year ago, and the market was pretty bad for clinic owners, so for our clients. And so what happens when the market is a bit slow for clinic owners is that they either start to panic and want to cancel marketing because it's not working, or they actually want to do much more marketing because they need to supercharge it. So that means it's months for us that are like absolutely busy and extremely difficult, and also a big drag on the team. And so I think it's a moment where I was like, well, what have I signed up for?
Yeah. How can I do this? Are you happy to share the terms that you did agree on ultimately with your investors?
Yeah, it was very important for me was to essentially, and something I tell searchers who I talk to, and specifically when they're very early on in the project or in their project and their journey, it's we're looking for. Are you looking to be an entrepreneur who essentially leapfrogs the 0 to 1, or are you looking to be a CEO? And again, it's like, two different paths, but you really want to manage people, build system, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Or you have a bit more of a, Wild West like personality, and you just want to build something, be an entrepreneur with, obviously the someone who's done the heavy lifting, or, like getting into a company where that 0 to 1 had already been done.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that needs to be reflected in the terms where, like, I was happy to take more risk and, commit a significant amount as well to the deal.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I wanted to be in a position where I feel like I'm an entrepreneur and that I'm not working for someone else. And it's not, an ego thing, but it's like, look, if I don't feel like I have agency, we won't get 100% of what I can do. And I think, that's not what we're signing up for. So I think what that means is that I needed to have, the control, the governance of the company. And again, like with our board, I have one board member at the moment, and it's our board meetings are, very easy and so on and so forth. And obviously, he brings a lot to the table and so on and so forth. So it's not like, I was looking for a tyrannic like governance of the company, but it's essentially like it needs to feel like it's very fluid rather than having, like stuff very rigid, very set, because I think, we want to move pretty fast. So that was one thing. There was obviously like the question of the ownership. And I think for me, I had to feel like I was owning essentially the controlling ownership of the business. So what we did is essentially, instead of doing a vesting of shares based on performance, we've done a reverse vesting where I have the shares unless I deliver, and then the shares get clawed back. But I think, and it's something I've done in my previous companies and so on and so forth. It's something I've done as well with employees who I give options to. It really helps change and reframe the mindset where, look, you're not on the treadmill that keeps accelerating, and there's the terms are sometimes a bit opaque and so on and so forth. It's like, look, these shares are yours unless you blow it up, unless we don't perform. But then you play to essentially like you have that ownership from day one, which I think is something that I personally find very
it's not contingent on you doing something; it's contingent on you or on the business not failing.
Exactly. It's exactly that.
Yes.
So obviously, that's something as well that some investors needed a bit of, a few conversations on, or some of them were, look, I'm not interested in these terms. Like I would say there was with some investors a conceptual aversion to essentially not owning the majority of the shares. And I would say it's something where the mindset in the US I found is very different.
But they wouldn't own it anyway, right? Because they are disparate. There's a number, and unless they all knew each other already or decide to kind of collectively, take over the business, then they're always going to be a minority investor.
But I would say the amount of work, effort, however you want to frame it, to get to 49.5% of ownership, that the unit of effort and the marginal effort you need to do to go from 49.5 to 50.1% is vastly superior than what you would need to get from 50.1 to 55%, for instance. It's like, it's a mental barrier of like the 50%.
Well, that's control. Yeah, exactly. You can do what you like.
Exactly.
But again, ultimately, you've identified the deal. You're going to be running it, let you have control. So I'm pleased that you've managed to get those terms. I think I think it's only right in a self-funded situation. And ultimately, I guess you have the option to shop around until you find someone that takes
exactly.
the other
and
side.
I think it's also, I mean, all in all, the business it would have been deemed small for a traditional search, right? And so I think that's also why, when I talk to aspiring searchers and so on and so forth, I tell them, well, look, you got to be very clear on the path that you're taking, whether you go funded or self-funded, because there's the CEO entrepreneur route, but there's also like, do you actually want to build, again, as I said, like get into a project or a company that's a bit more emerging, that's not as structured, and that's what you want to do? Or do you actually want to already steer a pretty big ship? Because if you're going to go the self-funded route, the traditional search route, you're going to have to go for something bigger.
Yeah, that's it. Because the investors won't.
Exactly.
You won't.
Because otherwise the numbers don't work for anyone, right? So,
Got it. There's a standard question that we're asking everyone at the end of the episode, which is what is your dream now, and how has that changed from when you were younger?
Oh wow. Well, my dream was to win Wimbledon and the French Open.
Okay,
so I guess I don't think we're going to get there. But I think pretty much from when I was young, I think the dream is to essentially be in a position or build a life where you have freedom. And I think for me the only path that I found for that was entrepreneurship. I think for better or worse. And I think it's you pay for it, I would say, at a pretty steep price at times, specifically when things don't go too well and you spend time staring at the ceiling. But I'd say it's for me it was a non-negotiable, and I think something that I ultimately came to entrepreneurship a bit late. I had a few, that started a couple of companies when I was a student to, make a bit of cash here and there, but it wasn't anything serious. And I would say I came to entrepreneurship when I was pretty much, in my early 30s, which I think, could be seen as a bit late to some extent. But deep down, when I look back, I think it was hard coded somewhere. And I think, it's for better or worse, I think the path that I think, I don't really see any other path for me, for better or worse again.
Yeah. No, I completely understand that dream. I think, it's often a word that I think of when I think about what entrepreneurship means. It's freedom, right? And in all aspects, having control of the company, economic freedom and being able to do the things you want to do and so on. So yeah.
And 7 days work week and, but it's,
exactly.
It's high risk, high reward, it's one of the laws of the universe, right?
It's not easy to get freedom, right? It's hard, but yeah, definitely worth it. Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on. It's been really interesting hearing about the story, how you ended up pivoting from a roll up into acquiring the company. It'd be great to keep in touch and maybe have you on another time to hear how it's going and how the growth continues.
Well, thank you for having me. That was great.
Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Found and Funded Pod and LinkedIn at the Found and Funded Podcast, and comment who you'd like to see us sit down with next. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, drop me a message and let's have a chat.